just start the recording. Yeah. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. So let's start the discussion, right? Like I think like the first topic itself is like even before jumping into the cloudcast, I feel like it makes a sense to sort of start on the open source topic, like even before the Terraform licensing, because I feel like a lot of us are depending on open source solutions as well as like it's sort of the core component, but with respect to a lot of license changes and also like, hey, do we pay for the products? Like, hey, how the community, like the community backslash on license changes and all of that. So if you have any personal experience or general suggestions you can share, and then yeah, feel free to share your thoughts. Like we can go one by one and then share. So yeah, and pick names. Like I feel like if we don't pick names, like people wouldn't share thoughts. So Craig, maybe you can go first. Like given that you've already said you're using a bunch of open source solutions, what do you think? Like how do you sort of see this now? Is there anything which is affected personally in your organization?
Okay, so on the topic of open source, I have been submitting so many patches to third-party projects. I've submitted like patches to. I'm working with the team at or I mentioned in the chat that I'm working with the Oracle Cloud, and I'm working with their Terraform team because they have some Terraform scripts for provisioning Kubernetes clusters. And I've been submitting so many patches to their stuff. So, and I have been using open source since like I'm a little bit older, so like since like the early 1990s. So this is like before Git, before GitHub, before Subversion. I was like exchanging patches on mailing lists. So I've been using open source for a long time. I used to be involved with a project called FreeBSD, which is an operating system, kind of like Linux. And so I submitted many patches there. So I think like open source goes hand in hand with the cloud, the internet. It's part of the DNA of like what we work on. So you can't get away from it. It's always been there and it'll always be there. But what I would say is maybe some things are changing now, because the difficulty is for some companies which maybe they start out with open source for whatever strategic reasons, but as the company gets, older and, more established, the pressure is to make money. And so what worked in the early days of the company doesn't work now. And so these companies are reevaluating. So like one company that is reevaluated is Red Hat. I mean, I used Red Hat Linux in the late 1990s and it was all open source and all that. And now they're kind of moving away from open source, even though they were one of the founders. In the past month, we've seen like HashiCorp with Terraform. So the question is like, what is open? Like we're used to open source. We like use GitHub all over the place and whatever. We contribute patches here and there. But the question is going to be like, what is going to happen to like the core stuff that we use and depend on? How is that going to change? So I'm thinking things like Linux, Kubernetes, Terraform, the core stuff. So that I don't know. Maybe some other people in the chat will have some insight to this, and
Yeah. No, as in like I think that like we can leave the topic of companies are trying to make money and then whether it's a right move or not. Like I feel like that's a bit of out of scope. Like and it's a larger discussion. But I think like with respect to technicalities of hey, like we put so much efforts into the open source and then adoption. And then like when these kind of license changes happens, like the migration efforts and all of that, like is definitely a concern for a lot of companies. And I feel like there is a trust or like I mean whether people read the code completely or not is a different question, but there is a trust towards open source companies, open source solutions over closed companies because devs tend to try those products. But given these latest changes, like it's not just a first thing, like Elasticsearch is a classic example of exploited by some companies. MongoDB changed licenses, Redis Labs, I think, changed licenses and whatnot. But I think Zoe, like you folks are going open source. So what is like I also saw an article very recently on companies' commitment to keeping it open source forever, like because there is no binding, right? Like, hey, because you start as an open source, community contributes, and then like companies revert, and then this BSL license change. Like, do you folks have any plans, or like how do you see this? Is it affecting you like as a vendor, like open source vendor?
Yeah. So our startup company run almost like 2 years already, and at this point we are not open source, but we are going to announce something next month. I guess one of the reasons that is we do want to be really like cloud only company, right? But it's not. I mean, the world is not really works as we expected, right? We always get requests, hey, can I run this on-prem? Can I understand better about your internal mechanism, how you do state management, how you do failover? And they even, I mean, when I talk to a few developers or potential users, they even said this open source is a must-have in their checklist. They only choose the service which is open sourced. In the end, whether they're using the open source version or whether using the cloud version or enterprise version, that's TBD. But in some company, the policy is they have to use open source version so that I guess they might have a certain level of security, right? If the company is big enough, if they are running some critical workload, if they choose open source version, they might have a better way to either fix the issue or enhance it, or just in case the company behind the open source or behind the product they go bankrupt, they can still have the resource to maintain that code. Yeah, so you can always say like company like Snowflake never open source, but there's only one Snowflake. But most of the other data companies, I guess we don't really have much choices. So to me, we have a lot of discussion internally as a vendor, but yeah, in the end, we decided to go open source, at least for our core engine, so that people can we can build a better trust with the developers, and they can also deploy everything on-prem without using our cloud version or set up some kind of unblock-based network forwarding. Yeah, I'm not sure whether that makes sense to you guys.
Isaac, Clayton, Henry, like Craig, you folks can jump in. Like if you have
Sure. So I'll give my 2-cent opinion. First of all, I'm an ASF committer, ASF Apache Software Foundation committer. My email address is hchan@apache.org. That having been said, I'm all for the concept of MLP. Some of you guys probably heard of MVP, most valuable product. New term, MLP, most lovable products. So the answer is whatever it takes to make the customer happy and deliver on time. If you're going to spend an extra 3 or 4 months setting up ECK or whatever, and the customer wants it yesterday, then hell no.
I think the interesting part is there are a few factors I feel like which needs to be addressed in a long term, right? So one is a lot of us are leveraging the open source, but like as a developers, it's perfectly fine. But if you're profiting from it, if your business sort of relies on it, like do we have enough licenses? And also like the contributions, I feel like there are a lot of contributions which stops at very small minimal document exchanges and then bugs. Like some of us have done, like as you folks have said, like you've done features. But what I mean is like a lot of companies sort of says that, hey, we are VC-backed companies and then we are funded because like we drive most of the features, even though like the community is building it, like they often put that comment out. And also like there is a third part, of course, like there are a lot of companies out there using their open source solution, packaging it, and then offering cloud services. Of course, like some companies are like well-known, like all of this companies change because of that, like some well-known big FANG companies. But I feel like these are all like some factors which have to change over time. Because otherwise, like it's tricky, like if everyone goes closed source, but I feel like more than just Terraform, there are a lot of companies which is built on top of it, which made the Terraform ecosystem much more better and also like much more available, right? So it's really tricky. So that's why I was asking, like if some company was personally affected, if someone's behavior change, like you used to contribute, and then if you stop contributing to Terraform now because of the license change, then definitely it's a downside, right? But yeah. So just on that note, like, has anyone been affected by the Terraform license changes recently, or like even RHEL license changes? Do you folks have to do anything because of that, like migration efforts or anything? Okay, gotcha. No, because I remember like our company, we had to put a lot of effort in terms of like moving away from a Java Oracle version to like the open source version. There are some painful migrations with respect to the license changes in some companies, but yeah, like it's cool if you don't have any issues. If you don't have any competing products, I think like the license change doesn't necessarily affect you.
Yeah,
I've
so-
not had any issues with it, but in my last company, everyone was kind of not paranoid is not the right word, but conscientious about that something like that could happen at any time. And I feel like it spurred on a discussion to always be aware of it and kind of adopt more hexagonal architecture in a more sort of strict way, so that if anything like that happened, you could just swap out elements. And I feel like it can sort of lead to a more robust or sort of flexible piece of software, essentially, if you're thinking about it a lot.
But I'm not sure like whether like OpenTelemetry came up just because of a vendor lock-in issue. But I'm not sure like whether that kind of set up customizable, like replaceable pieces is applicable in all the places. Because
Definitely not with Terraform. I was referring to something else, but yeah, not with the Terraform stuff. But I was thinking more along the lines of open source like packages and stuff you might use, because stuff like that has happened to me in the past where things have just all of a sudden stopped being sort of supported, or licenses have changed. Not Terraform exactly.
Yeah, I guess one example can be Arca, right? I'm not sure whether some of you use Arca as one of nice Java-based multi-threading / comparison security model. I mean, I guess they also changed the license model. You might have to request a license from Arca, otherwise you're not supposed to use their new version, right? So even company like, I mean, open source project like Flink, they are somehow decided to either stick to an older version or using a fork version. I mean, I guess that's also the problem for the BSL, is that called a business source available license. That is, people think that license is very vague. You never know whether how you use it is somehow can be a conflict of interest for the mother company. So you don't have this kind of the certainty at any time, any moment. Maybe you might get a surprise, say you cannot use that version, or you have to require a license. I guess it might be annoying.
I mean, specifically in Terraform, I think like, there are a lot of competing cloud providers like Terraform Cloud, or like I think like especially they were mentioning I forgot, like not TerraGrant, but like some other open source like Pulumi. I think like they were mentioning that like there are other communities which evolved because of Terraform, but I feel like somehow because they need to make it profitable, they are making these changes. But again, like we are not building a competing offering very specific to like very similar to Terraform, but again, like that statement is vague, is what as mentioned by Zoe. But yeah, like as a single solo org, like if you're using Terraform for any purposes, I don't think like it should affect as much. But yeah, like we have to sort of wait and see how it changes. Like, is there going to be any fork? How are they going to sort of like pose the issues, or like put the bugs and everything, like how that is backtracked into like some sources and all of that. But yeah, like it'll be interesting to sort of like wait and see only. Craig, like I think like so we can sort of connect the topic. I feel like, so I think like in my personal experience also, like it's true that like we're using an open source version, like the cloud cost, like the cost is much more cheaper over a cloud offering. Like I think observability is a little bit tricky, because I've seen Datadog 65 million a Q4, like 1 quarter billing for I think one Bitcoin company. There are a lot of cases like that. But in general, like even Kafka, like in my company, we were managing a Kafka cluster, which is usually like 1/10 of the cost of the cloud offering. So like it's sort of interesting you mentioning cost, but like there is also effort to it. You can frame the question better. You can sort of add more context. Maybe others can jump in, and then like I can add some context as well.
I mean, in my experience, it depends on the company. So it depends on the size of the company and how much money they have. If it's a startup, how much funding they have. Not the current company that I'm in, but in 4 years ago, I worked for a Kubernetes storage startup. And in that company, we did all our automation on Supermicro servers in a co-location facility, because it was cheaper for us to buy our own servers and host them in a colo than to do anything in the cloud. We did have things in the cloud, but very, very small, and we tightly controlled the cloud costs because the product had to work in AWS, Azure, GCP, and all that. So we had the bare minimum stuff in the cloud, but the core automation and QA was done on machines in a colo. So that's not typical for everybody, and it's not typical these days, but I have seen for very, very cost conscious people looking at alternatives to clouds, which are self-hosting machines, or using like colos, which are not the big cloud names, but like smaller companies that either have their own hardware or allow you to host their hardware. So it depends on the company. Like probably like huge enterprise company, like say Netflix, they just have money to blow, and they have all their stuff in a large part of their stuff in AWS, and they pay a huge bill to AWS. But even Netflix, some of their content delivery network, they have their own physical hardware, which is in their own distributed data centers around the world for doing streaming. And so, yeah, it depends on the company, depends on the use case, where can they spend money. And but a cloud cost, cloud optimization, that's a big thing. So there's like small companies that specialize in like analyzing cloud costs. There are consultants who specialize in analyzing cloud costs and recommending how to cut costs. So it is a thing these days. Yeah.
Henry, guys, like has anyone else like used an alternative like in-house solution over cloud, or like what's your personal take on the cloud cost over in-house cost? Anyone?
So I use a tool called KubeCost. I also use Kube Capacity. I'm on EKS right now, so I always believe you always need a hybrid. So very few people could go full open source. For example, let's say you have a laptop. What is it? Mac. Oh shoot, Mac's not open source. Oh shoot, I'm running Windows. That's not open source. How far do you want to go? You'll always be, unless you're running Ubuntu. But no one could go up here. I'll say what I said earlier. MLP, that wins the day.
Gotcha. So I can add some points as well, right? Like, so there is multiple aspects. So I feel like, I mean, again, keeping the economy outside, in general, there is always a question of, do you build it in-house, or do you want to buy a solution? Like if you go for any offerings, like cloud solutions. And then there is a second thing on how long do you, will you be using the product, right? So there are a lot of observability solutions out there, and then companies adopt it at early stages. But the moment they grow to a different scale, there is two aspects. Like one is if you don't use it properly, like if you don't send, if you're not cautious about sending like some traces or logs, it's going to become super expensive. And also like as you scale, like the cost is going to be like a lot. And I think like the same is applicable for CI/CD tools, or let's say terraform, any cloud which is actually baked into your day-to-day workflow, I feel like there's going to be a lot of discussion over like a random non-tech like a business offering, right? So now like there is a question of, do you have expertise to build it as well as maintain it and then support it like for your scale? So I've talked to so many companies and a lot of them, they have a dedicated team for maintaining Prometheus or observability stack in-house. So in a way, we can say that if the total cost, not just like with respect to cost of resources, but also like the cost of devs is included, if that is less, then it's an easier call, but somehow it's hard to quantify because there is a time factor which you can't predict. So in general, what I've seen is the dev cost and then like using an open source version is a very good decision in a longer run. And then if you have resources to sort of throw at it, like in terms of you folks to spend time. But if you want to do something quick, if you want to do something like, hey, you are much more focused on like delivering a product and then like you have a lot of other issues and then you don't have a bandwidth to maintain it, then it becomes an issue. Having said that, like there is also additional thing on pain points of managing this observability or Kafka, or as he said, like Elastic. There is a lot of pain with respect to onboarding, adopting, and then scaling these open source solutions. So in a way, like literally, like our team, like we faced a situation where if everything works, they can even question why this team exists, right? But on other sense, you've saved a lot of cloud cost. If that is like I think this is a big thing I've noticed in large organizations. If you save the cost upfront, it's really hard to quantify it. But if we were using a solution, external solution, saying, hey, you were paying $1 million per year, and then after this effort, you were able to save like 50% of it, then that effort is easily quantifiable. And also like it's easier to like put more effort, spend bandwidth on managing and then like maintaining that open source solution, like open source in-house solution for long term. But yeah, it depends on a lot of factors is what I feel.
Yeah, I quite agree with you. And also Henry mentioned that is building is cheap, maintaining is expensive. So for example, in general, I think SaaS company or startup company like us should use more SaaS when your company is very small, you are very focused, you want to move fast. I'll give you an example. So from the early days, we start using Grafana Cloud as our kind of observability. It may sound ridiculous because many of us actually coming from Splunk, we are very familiar with those or ERK stack. It's not that hard for us to maintain either on-prem version or our own hosted version of Grafana or Elasticsearch or even Splunk by ourselves. But if you look at the pricing model, the minimal monthly fee is just, I guess, $49 for Grafana Cloud, and they give you a reasonable good number of logs and metrics. They can update the version for you, and they have very nice support. And I also run into some cases, we made some misconfiguration. We send too many metrics or send too many logs to them. I just send a message to them. Sorry, it's a mistake. And do you think you can somehow handle this? And yeah, it happens a few times. They just waive that cost. Again, I really appreciate. I'm not saying this is something you can play with the company. It's just saying those are big companies. They really provide very nice service. But on the other hand, for example, Grafana Cloud is charged by index. I know some other observability service they charge by query, right? So sometimes if you don't pay enough attention, you might end up with a surprising high cost, even you don't search about that. But back to my point, that is, if your load is not so crazy, if you have limited number of engineers, if you don't want to keep maintaining different open source stack, choosing some SaaS solutions can save a lot of time and even money for you. Right? At least you don't have to hire a few other engineers for that.
I just want to point out something out. Sometimes choice is not yours. You said choosing. So who chooses it? Is it the CEO? Oh, sorry, you're a founder. I know that. Or you said that earlier. Great. So you make a lot of decisions. But some companies you don't get to choose. I'm currently working for a Fortune 500 company. I'm not going to disclose a name. I've worked from startups as well too, where I've been a founder as well too. And when you're a founder, you get to make all the decisions you want. When you work for Fortune 500 companies, the number one goal of the company is to make the customer happy. They would say, great, we need to come out with an MVP and LP very quickly, and then we have to decide if this is even the right decision. And then they pivot and pivot again. So sometimes the decision is not yours to go to open source decision. It's money, time, and customer. So it's rarely your decision unless you're a founder. But
Yeah, very true.
Good for you. Good for you that you're a founder. And from the bottom of my heart, good luck, sir.
No, I think like there is a different side of the story, right? Like I feel like non-tech folks, they wouldn't try to run it. Like I feel like there is a lot of pride with running things by ourselves and then doing things by ourselves, like especially in the dev ecosystem. So I feel like even though it's hard, like we would love to sort of tackle it and then like run it by ourselves. I've noticed in a bunch of cases where clearly it's a pain more than like using a cloud offering. So I feel like these days Kubernetes running it in-house is going to be more painful. Like you should mostly stick to AWS or like a GCP managed Kubernetes cluster, unless you have a really exceptional use cases. But I feel like sometimes a lot of people like they just think, hey, whatever some reasoning, like be it data privacy, even though like it is fine. Like I've noticed some companies trying to host it by themselves. Observability, I feel like these days it's much more established that the cost is going to increase a lot. But in other spaces, it's really hard to not just predict, but also like this point where I don't know how many companies would invest in visualizing and then estimating the cost of their infrastructure, because till they reach a particular stage, I think like mostly people throw resources at it, right? Like so you spin up clusters, you spin up so many VMs, you spin up as much as you need, but the moment you hit a point where hey, you're spending millions and millions in cost per year, then you start to look at where I'm spending most of the cost. Then you figure out, hey, how do I optimize it? So this is sort of reactive more than active processing is what I feel, which is actually which has a more downside than actively adopting open source solution because hey, you want to go in this route. But yeah, like the visualization aspect, estimation aspect is something I've noticed which is missing in so many companies at the right stages. So Craig, like I think like sort of connecting. So is it easier for you to decide now for you to say, hey, this is a pain. We have spent so much time. I think it makes sense to go for a cloud. Or like is there a conversation like you can have, and then like do you have specific metrics you've decided which you can say after 8 months if I come to you and ask, hey, why don't we go and buy the solution? Like do you folks have any metric or anything specific now?
I don't. I think one of the previous speakers, I don't know if it was Henry or maybe who's the other person that spoke, but mentioned that it's the size of the company. So like if you're a 10-person startup, then it totally makes sense to just use every single managed service you can because you want to get an MVP out there. But then once you're beyond like a 10-person startup, and then you're like 10, 50, 100, 150, 200 people, suddenly the decisions you made at the 10-person level don't scale at the 200-person level. And then you have to look at optimizing, and then that's where the trade-off comes in of, do you use a managed service or do you self-host? So when that price point is there, I don't know, because I've always come in at the point where it's like an emergency. That's like, holy cow, we're spending XXX on this. We need to like cut money now because XYZ, blah, 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 funding, blah, runway, blah, blah, blah. And so that's kind of where I've come into the situation, more in startups. So like big enterprises, I mean, I don't work there now. I worked 1 year at Walmart Global Tech, which has like thousands of developers. And crazy things like they were migrating off of Slack to Teams, because when you have like 10,000 people in Slack, it's like the cost of Slack is like too much. And so when you're like a CTO, CFO, whatever, you're like, how can I cut costs? Well, this thing called Slack, it costs this. And Microsoft is like giving me a deal on Teams, so I can save this money with thousands of users. So let me do that. So Slack, goodbye. Let's start migrating to Teams. So it depends. But for a 10-person startup, like using Slack is okay. And the cost is there, but it's okay. And it makes you very productive. So yeah, so I don't have a good answer for your question. The answer is it depends. And I've always been there in like different situations. So
it's
maybe
all,
other people.
I mean, it's literally like it's really interesting to hear that case of like spending effort on like moving from Slack to Teams, because I've mostly seen like there are so many other critical pieces of infra. Like mostly we don't scale down. Like people take more snapshots than required. Disk size we always increase more. So many Kubernetes clusters which is not killed. Unused resources. But like, I mean, I thought like it's easier conversation to say, hey, it doesn't make sense to sort of do this, but there are a lot of other places to sort of spend our efforts and then reduce the cost because this is long term. Because I know, like personally, I've seen people just spin up Elastic, like not Elasticsearch, like Kubernetes clusters, one for each cases, and it costs so much, and then nobody ever goes back and looks at it and then tears down. But again, like there might be more variables which would have played, but like I thought it's only in the technical context. It's actually interesting to hear on other non-tech aspects as well.
Well, I mean, the other side kind of to what you mentioned is like I've worked in places where you come in there and like the original person who spun up XYZ resource is no longer there. So no one knows how the hell this stuff was set up. No one knows what this thing depends on. So if you shut it down, you don't know when it's going to break. So then there's the fear factor where it's like, okay, so you just leave this thing running and then you just hope for the best. I worked in a startup like that where crazily enough, like the whole ops team was in China, and they just like, okay, we need to cut costs. So they fired the whole ops team. So there was no ops team for like a year, but they had one guy who was like the liaison for the ops team. He was in California. And that guy, he had such a high bill rate. I couldn't even ask him a question directly. I had to proxy all my questions through my manager. And then, because he charged an outrageous bill rate, even for like a 1 hour conversation. So even like, what is this like database doing? What is this Kubernetes cluster? I couldn't ask. So I've seen that level of craziness in startups. So it happens. I mean, in a startup, people are like, hey, we need to get something out fast. They do X, Y, and Z. They click on buttons and cloud UIs. They create all this stuff. If you're lucky, they'll still be around like 1 to 2 years later. But, people go off and around. And, sometimes as a platform person, you come on and then you're inheriting stuff, which you don't know what it is. Maybe it's not documented. That's a very common story I've seen too as well.
Actually, I've seen the story go the opposite direction. Like you said, they fired an ops team in China. So I'm working for a Fortune 500 company in the US. I actually see it the other way. They're trying to offshore more work to people in India.
That is the more common story. But like, I have lots of crazy war stories from my career. So that is like one of the craziest war stories I ever had. So the company was based in California, but like a lot of the team was in China.
I see.
And I don't know why they thought it was a good idea to cut costs that way, but that's what they did. And so like a lot of the ops was on like autopilot for like 1 year. And like they just had one liaison who used to be the liaison for that team, and he charged an outrageous bill rate. He would come in like once a month and he would be in like sandals and shorts, and he would be smiling, and I couldn't talk to him. because it was too expensive for me to even say hello to him. And that if you can get to that point in your career, then you know you've made it.
I think I can share some specific examples, like given that we are talking a lot on this. Like I've literally done so many migrations and we've moved away from so many things, but there are some interesting pieces, right? I feel like there are a lot of low-hanging fruits which the whole organization can do in order to save cost. So very simple things like setting up right logging level from day zero. I've seen people push so much logs from staging environments to observability stack, which is which makes it so expensive, but like you can't measure it, right? It's really hard to bring in a system to measure it. So we have built an internal cloud storage kind of a thing model to store our logs because the observability solutions became expensive. And we moved away, like we actually managed internal Kafka clusters, which was way cheaper than a public cloud. But the interesting part is we were fighting a lot on retention because people sometimes comes and says that, hey, we want to keep it for a year. And I'm like, no, like there is a difference between transactions and then having a cold storage. And the cost of using a hot storage is very different than like using a cold storage. And then if you want a year worth of data, you have to go to big data solutions, something data lakes or whatever. But if you're using that in the hot like storage layer, then it's going to be super expensive. And then like I think like at Elasticsearch, like I didn't personally see a cost optimization, but like before that, we even did a cost optimization for databases because there's no archival mechanisms. Because there is no periodic archivals, your database keeps growing. And then as it keeps growing, the snapshot becomes expensive. And the number of snapshots and the time taken, like how frequently you take it, is so expensive, because of which we have put an explicit effort to say, hey, these are the tables, these are not used, these are the ones we need to prune it. But I feel like if you start fresh, if you're thinking about any database, and then if you're thinking a scalable mechanism, you should think about archival, periodic archival from day one, right? So I feel like there are a lot of checklist kind of things which goes missing, and it's much more easier to adopt those at earlier stages than later stages. Because like stuff like we tried migrating away from some type of VMs from in GCP because that's expensive. But after a while, like the moment you scale to a certain extent, the migration effort is going to be way more expensive, like way harder to ensure you don't break anything. Like the migration is much more harder than like building something from scratch, right? So yeah, I feel you, like in that sense, I feel like yeah, we have done so many stories, we have done migration for years and whatnot. But yeah, like it's sort of interesting how every company, how everyone sort of thinks differently. I've actually added a bunch of topics in the Trello. Like feel free to sort of like put in, jump in, like ask any questions because others can share. If not, like since you said watch stories and there's a lot on alerting, I feel like, hey, how do you guys set up alerting, production readiness? All of that is usually a good discussion. Like if there's any specific questions, do share. Otherwise, probably I can, like we can discuss the next topics. Anyone has any specific questions? Probably I'll keep this. This feels a little bit different. Maybe I can combine this. Like this one. Like so in general, like the context behind this card is there is two aspects, right? Like, hey, how do you do testing with respect to downtimes, like chaos testing? Like I'm not talking about the usual unit testing, integration testing, promises and stuff, but it's sort of interesting to see how companies think about failure cases. Chaos Monkey is a good enough example. And then correlated to that, alerting, or like in general, hey, what is noise versus what is reality? Like because like Craig mentioned, hey, it's so expensive to talk to ops people. And also like Henry, you mentioned like you're in support. Like I feel like a lot of times we start with so much noise in the fear of like, if you miss any critical alerts, then it's going to be way more expensive, catastrophic than fixing it. So sort of curious on your thoughts. Like you can extend the topic, yeah, like in general on that chaos testing, alerting, like how do you do reliability and that kind of stuff. Anyone can share thoughts. So maybe you can go, like I'll pick on you. What do you folks do to prevent this kind of stuff? Any practices, any learnings?
Yeah, I had a lot of log alerts in my previous life in Scrum. We are working on much bigger product and engineering team. But now in our current smaller company, yeah, we don't get a lot of alerts. Yeah, I mean, that's even something we try to, it's somehow a problem to solve, right? So people don't really want overwhelming alerts. So our product try to make this smarter, but internally we don't get a lot of alerts. For example, I do enjoy stuff like Grafana. They have some cooldown period, right? So if certain issues is pop up, but if can be resolved in 2 or 3 minutes, then you don't really have to get notified. And all those alerts should be version controlled, code reviewed, or even apply CI/CD. But again, I'm kind of lucky enough not to worry too much about alert at this point. So anyone else have better or worse story, feel free to share.
I can share one bit, and then I'll pick on Craig or Isaac, someone. We had an instance where we stopped receiving alerts, and then like a day is okay, but after a day or two, we realized something is wrong, because usually we never have a day without an alert. Like that's kind of the environment we were working at, because everything was so critical. Like it was very central storage Kafka. And then we realized, hey, we are not receiving alerts. There are the systems which we set up for sending alerts for us. And then we realized that after notifying them, the alerting system itself was down. And usually there is a good point on, hey, who's monitoring the monitoring systems? Like if you have operations team who set up observability stack and then alerting, who's going to be monitoring that, right? So like we had extreme cases like that. Like if you don't receive alerts, that means it's not like your system is fine. It's like there might be something else wrong. But yeah, that's just a crazy instance which I remember. There are a lot of wartime stories, but yeah, like Craig, maybe you should go. If not, like Isaac, probably after.
No, I let someone else speak. Otherwise, it's like cheaper than therapy to give all my traumas.
No, you can rant. I feel like yeah, if others are quiet. So like Isaac, okay, Isaac, Deepak, if you have anything to share, jump in.
Nothing comes to mind really. I'd be quite keen to hear what Craig got to say.
Oh man,
Well,
you're opening a Pandora's box by saying that, man. So be very careful.
in my experience also, I never had a chance to work as a DevOps people, especially in chaos kind of environment, to be honest.
Yeah, go on, Craig. If not, like maybe I think like I'll share a bit of context on chaos testing. Like I think like given that like it's not established, so in general we do write unit testing, integration testing, service contract tests, some level of different canary testing. After deployments, you do testing and whatnot. But all of these cases, you assume things are working fine, and also like most of the time. The failures you can imitate is limited. Like what I mean by that is if you have a service A and then if you're calling service B, you can mock service B failure, but you can never predict like a sort of make service timeouts. You can never make network failures. You can never make random network issues. So what Netflix has done is they basically built a system called Chaos Monkey, which goes and randomly shuts down a service. It goes and randomly stops a database. It randomly goes and stops a VM. I think like even Uber, like there are a lot of other companies which adopted chaos testing, because like even at my company, my experience is there are a lot of issues which happens in prod, only in prod because of the scale, like be it indexes, be it the data size, those wouldn't be revealed in staging environments. So like these high scale companies, they started doing this chaos testing, which sort of forces you to build a system which is resilient of failures. You always have to assume anything can go wrong, because most of the times people I think circuit breakers, you don't think about service timeouts, you don't think about one service going down and then affecting you, because you think, hey, everyone will do things right. But beyond a scale, you reach a different point where you have to assume everything will fail. So the chaos monkey or like chaos testing is really interesting in that context. It's hard to sort of set it up, but it's really, really interesting. Concept as well as like topic you folks should check. Yeah, with that little bit of stuff, like Craig, you can start ranting or
I'm in a good mood at the end of the day.
Okay.
What I'm doing in my other window, I'm using the Elastic API to do a snapshot of a entire Elastic cluster. And I've never done it before, so I'm YOLOing it.
Gotcha. Maybe I'll add a bit more, right? So I think not just alerting, but like in general, I've seen you need to have a production checklist. You need to have, hey, these are the things we need to do before deployment. These are the things like we need to monitor after deployment. Like I'm not talking about configured alerts, but rather once we deploy, we sort of have to go and ensure whether everything is right, because at that scale, again, not everything is visible. And of course, like you have to have like a practice where any failures you have to capture and test, and also like any failures you missed should be captured in alerting. But yeah, that's the place, right? Like if you start with a lot of noise, you remove noises over time, and then anything critical, if you miss it, you add it, and then you have to be in a balanced state where you don't wake up in the middle of the night for a unactionable incidents. It could be as simple as like restarts. Or like ignoring, like if you can ignore it, if you can wait for a while, that means it's not a critical alert. And then there are a lot of alerts which we usually set up which are not actionable. Like there are a lot of stuff you have to do to avoid it. And then there are critical things, right? Because if you have so many alerts, if there is something critical, we will miss it also. Like because if your database is down, and then if you are flooded with alerts usually, you're gonna think that this is also a noise, and then like you're gonna have a much more like major downtime than fixing it. So yeah, like it's a long story. Like I have a lot of experiences. Maybe Henry, like you said you're in support now. What is the like? I don't know whether you have a structure.
I'm not support. I wear many hats, but yes, support's one of them. So chaos engineering. Yep, thumbs up. So I had 3 companies that tried to do chaos engineering. All 3 companies failed for the same reason, and I see this as a recurring pattern. So for those who don't know, there's something called the test pyramid by J.K. Rowling, Martin, kind of name, something Martin. The test pyramid says 70% of your tests should be unit tests. Don't even think about doing chaos testing if you haven't finished your unit test. And guess what? A lot of people have the reverse of a pyramid. What is the reverse of a pyramid? It's called the ice cream pattern. You can Google up the ice cream testing pattern and you can see it's an anti-pattern. Why is it? It's a reverse. An ice cream cone is the reverse of a pyramid. That means most of your tests are manual tests. So that's why we failed chaos testing, because we didn't have a good base of a pyramid, unit testing. And then the line blurs. Where does unit testing begin and unit testing begin? Recently, I've been using something called test containers. Google up testcontainer.org, or I can type it out for you. Test containers. .org. The next level of testing really is to even test the sanity of your SQL statements. And trust me, I've seen developers checking code with SQL that did not work or that was broken. And like syntactically compiles. You can't write a unit test because you have to mock the database. So therefore you have to write test containers. And only after you finish so many layers of testing do you start introduce chaos testing. So yes, chaos testing, great idea. Reality, most companies aren't there yet.
Yeah, I'll add that disclaimer. Like the chaos testing experiment I've seen happening is like those companies are at much larger scale. yeah, probably at a small scale.
No, if I work from large companies to small companies, all companies I've seen is documentation is always lacking, testing is always lacking. That's a common theme in all of software.
Gotcha. So you mentioned like you need to use additional thing, like wouldn't the integration test like sort of catch those queries?
Sorry. So I typed in something called some taskcontainers.org. So recently, I'm trying to put. Okay, so let's talk about CI/CD a little bit. For those who don't know, CI/CD are very different things. Someone mentioned Argo CD, which is good, and then someone mentioned just CD. So CI. So in CI, you are meant to run unit tests. Here's a question. Let's say you write some Java code and you type select count star from students, and you expect it, you want to assert it to be 100, but you mistype the word select. You copy it select instead of select. Does it actually compile? Sure, of course it'll compile. But then how do you actually write a unit test for it? You write a mock for it. And the mock is like, well, we don't actually check syntactically if the SQL statement fails. And that's where I'm using this awesome tool called test containers to delegate it, because you would have a seeded Postgres server where it gets ran on the CI, not the CD. So it doesn't even get pushed to the next stage.
Interesting.
But anyways, I love your concept of chaos testing. I've used it in 3 companies. All 3 companies failed. No one's fault. It's just the immaturity of software engineering testing in general.
Gotcha. No, I think just adding on one point on, like I haven't seen the test containers, but the other side of the story is a lot of testing we do is on test environments. We had to go to a case where like just like you mentioned seeding databases, we had to go to a case where we had to load the data with so much high number of records in order to see whether you're missing any indexes or whether like mostly that wouldn't be revealed in integration tests also, and then even timeouts and all of that is affected by your query, and then usually most of the times if your APIs are slow, it often like usually means like you don't have any efficient query, or like you're not indexing it properly if it's a proper like database, like relational databases. So in that sense, we used to have some testing on load setups. Like we had a database which almost had like a clone of a production, and then we used to run tests on it with some strict timeline expectations as well. Of course, like the hard part is like it shouldn't be flaky, but rather good enough that like, hey, you expect those to happen within 2 seconds, and then that is a good value add, which you capture it much earlier than like, hey, it goes to prod and then it gets alerted and monitoring and whatnot. But yeah, like how it evolves, like service contract testing, all of that, yeah, it's a very different evolution, like for every company, I guess. But yeah. Anyone else, like anyone's else thoughts on testing or any of this, or like do share your questions as well. Anything, Zoe, Deepak, Greg, you should jump in, like Isaac, anything specific? How do you do testing?
I use AWS a lot, so I use local stack a fair bit. I don't know if you use that much. Sounds pretty similar to what Henry was just talking about, the test containers. I've been reading about it just now as he was talking, and it seems like test containers is kind of a local stack for everything. Is that right, Henry?
Yeah, there's actually a test containers local stack. Here's a link of what you said.
Mm-hmm.
So you can say, oh, test containers and local stack in the same URLs. Yeah, it does exactly that. Exactly what you think it does.
Okay, yeah, I've used local stack a fair bit, but usually just, either running it in a Docker container myself or potentially running it in Minikube. Yeah, I'll definitely check out this test containers. How do you usually go about sort of setting it up? And I've literally just gone onto the homepage.
Setup. Well, I come from the Java world, so you would use JUnit 5, and there's JUnit 5 annotations to set up test containers. Again, I don't know what programming language you use. It's just documentation is fairly good for test containers.
Cool.
Henry, one question out of curiosity. For the test containers, right? Have you also tested anything using BDD? I mean, I know BDD is a concept. As long as you are able to do any testing using Java.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said. Can you type in the word you said?
Yeah, sure. Are you able to hear me clearly now?
Yeah. Oh, BDD. Sure. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. This is a concept, BDD. It's not a framework. It's yeah. I use BDD. Okay. So for unit tests, I'm not a big fan of BDD. However, for the next tier on top, where you actually test integration testing, I am more a fan of BDD. In fact, we're using something called Postman Newman for BDD. I'm not sure. Most of you guys have heard of Postman before. I'm not sure if you guys heard of Newman before. Newman is the
No.
CL. So Postman is great for exploratory testing. What is exploratory testing? It means ad hoc testing, meaning you change things on the fly. I said, great. A lot of developers use it. Now could we take it a step even further? Can we reuse? And yes, that's what exactly Newman does. Newman runs Postman in the pipeline. And Newman uses a BDD-ish language. I think it's called Chai underneath.
Okay. I mean, I'm hearing first time away, but generally for BDD, I use Gherkin and Gherkin array or Cucumber. Let me explore this as well.
Sure. So the question is, if you're already in Postman, and most of the team, a lot of companies I work for already use Postman, you might as well reuse and then take it to the next level and use Postman. Like, you know how the last syllable is man? Guess what? Postman and Newman are from the same company. And then Newman underneath is JavaScript. And then JavaScript is a language called Chai.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to sort of share the stack, like create what's your stack, like CI/CD or language. We can go.
These days, I'm using a lot of Argo CD and Kubernetes. I have one team that is very front-end based, so they're doing a lot of like TypeScript. They have they're using like I'm not so much of a front-end guy, but they use a lot of frameworks like NX and Turbo Repo for building front ends. So they incorporate that as part of their like whatever CI or whatever, and then build everything to containers, use Argo CD to deploy to Kubernetes. So we're doing a lot of that in
What about the backend stack language?
Backend stack, it varies. So a lot of Go, mostly Go. A little bit of TypeScript, if you consider like TypeScript on the back end, a little bit of Rust. So yeah.
That's interesting. Like Rust is, yeah, like we'll keep it as a separate discussion. Like I'm really curious, like whether that requires such optimization or like it was picked by people.
Well, I mean, I'm in a startup, so I mean, there's a little bit of like, people are just kind of going for it kind of thing, and then there's certain things where like we've inherited some stuff, or if you're interfacing with a specific thing, then you need certain languages because it's just easier to work. So it's a little bit of all of the above. So I'm in a startup, so it's like a little bit faster moving and stuff like that. So
makes sense. Isaac, you can share like CI/CD language stacks you've used.
So in the past we were using like at my company at least it was mostly GitLab and or it was all the back end was in Go. We used to do a lot of mocking with Java, and unfortunately there was one company that had a SOAP API, so we had to use Java for that. I didn't actually do that myself, but I was mostly just using Go. Yeah.
What about the deployments? You said AWS, is it all in?
It was all in AWS, yeah. Using sort of terraform for platforms type stuff, Kubernetes for the actual services. There was some that just before I left, where there was some discussions about whether we should start bringing in service meshes and stuff like that. But I'm not sure where that went.
Gotcha. Nice. Zoe, you can go. We can go in order. Yeah, Zoe can go.
The tech stack?
yeah, the tech stack, CI/CD framework, and also yeah, like relevant to whatever stuff like we discussed the stacks. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So again, we are I mean our current team size is 16, more than 10, but less than 20. Yeah, we use GitHub for the CI/CD. I mean, in my previous company, Splunk. I mean, quick context that is, I mean, that company has been there for a long time. Even this year, they're celebrating the 20 years anniversary. They in the past they're using a bunch of stuff like Perforce or other Jenkins, but like that's maybe 6 or 5 years ago, they start a new business, the new Splunk cloud. So it's based on Kubernetes, based on a bunch of new tooling. So at that time, we start using GitLab, and so I have the mixed feeling for GitLab. So because in the past I thought, oh, GitLab may be just a copy of GitHub, but actually when you use it, and you will be kind of surprised how many feature is provided by GitLab. So yeah, I really like those pipeline tools or those amazing they call merge requests. But anyway, we cannot we don't really need so many powerful feature from GitLab, and GitHub is just the default option for most of the subcontainers. We're using Terraform for infrastructure as code, AWS, like Kubernetes. Our test on so our component is our database is in C++. So we have some interesting component or testing work over there. But our API layer is Golang, with the integration with different source of things, read data or write data too. So that's also Golang. Our UI is React. So yeah, there's many different testing framework involved. But in the same time, we are a very small team, so sometimes the same 3-person work on the Golang, work on the front-end testing, work on the cloud CI/CD, and then they have to switch mind multiple times a day. Yeah.
Nice. Greg, yeah, you can go. You can share whatever stack you're using. If there's any like any suggestion you want to ask, you can also share.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm also using GitLab, like the pipeline stuff in there. I'm using mostly just JavaScript, TypeScript, and AWS as well. Not so much Kubernetes yet, but doing some stuff with ECS just to kind of get a feel for like containers, how they actually like fit together in a cluster. And then yeah, I would like to tackle Kubernetes fairly soon. But haven't gotten too deep into that part of it yet.
Henry, yeah, you can go.
Yeah, maybe I'll go next. So, I mean, I've worked in a couple of companies, and most of the tools that you guys have mentioned, I will not repeat them. And probably I'll talk about one startup that I'm working for. Most of the tools are already we have spoken though. So for front end, we are using Node.js, React JS, and backend we are using Node.js. Also, some stack we are using Spring Boot with Java. In terms of queries, we are using GraphQL. That is one component that we are planning to use. I have not used it personally, but some of the projects that I had and in my previous companies, they were using it, and I find it's quite useful. So that's what we are planning to use. We are just starting to build our product actually. And in terms of infra, we are having AWS, we are having Argo with the Helm charts, and also we are going to have SonarQube and observability tools like OpenTelemetry, Grafana, Prometheus for these tools. And other than these, I think there are a couple of other tools I have used, I think that we didn't mention. One is Rancher for the deployments in one of the company I have used. Also, we have used Spinnaker for another deployment tool. And there's another tool that I like very much is Snyk, that basically the libraries that we are using, let's say if I'm a Java developer, I'm using a third-party library. So how do you know your code is not vulnerable? How the dependencies that they don't have any issues? So people are using this kind of tools like Snyk. I think there might be more alternatives, but so far I use Snyk in that way to check the dependencies which are not developed by your own company. So there are tools like that I've used, and yeah, obviously there are thousands of tools for building pipelines like Jenkins, Circle CI, Team City. Also, I think most of us are aware. Yeah, that's all from my.
Henry.
Sure. I'll go. My stack, I can't keep up with the languages my company uses. No, just I can't. There's just too many. Microservices all over. The orchestration for microservices, Kubernetes. The observability is Istio. Istio I'm using Prometheus in memory. Well, you can say, whoa, in memory. So what happens is we're using Datadog. So I've been trying to say, hey, Datadog's gonna scrape your Prometheus. Here's the truth of the matter. I don't trust Datadog enough. Datadog does something called rollup, which means that your data after 2 days is rolled up. The rollup means is the graph is smoothed out. So that's why I'm using Prometheus online. But like I said, front end, yeah, I don't care what my developers use, React.js, Next.js, whatever the next cool kid on the block is. Backend, yeah, we got Go, Java, Python, whatever. Some people are using WASM. Oh, I'm not sure if you guys heard of WASM, WASM, WebAssembly, Rust, Go. Sorry, Rust, yeah, Go's underneath. Databases, friggin', we got like 10 different type of databases. We've got Postgres, we got Aurora, we got Mongo, we got DynamoDB. I can't keep up with everything that our company's using. So the answer is a lot of everything.
No, that's cool. Like I think it seems like your company's large, right? Like that happens at large organizations. Every team starts using their own stack.
Right. So the real problem is how do you standardize? And the closest things we could come up with are microservices and open API.
Yeah, gotcha. Like I think like it's similar. Like I've done a lot of Go, primarily Kubernetes and also like VM based deployments. We did CDs, of course, like Argo CD, and then like we had some custom deployments as well. Actually, the Helm file is interesting. We sort of wrote some wrapper around it, like it's Helm, but like simplified Helm kind of a thing. It was really nice. We also wrote some operators for deployment. So we had some use cases where we had to write the operators because we were managing the deployments of the custom CRDs. And that time, like the Velero was an interesting thing because most of the times we use Kubernetes, but like we never think about Kubernetes backups. So this tool sort of enabled us to we had everything GitHubs. Even having said that, the Velero was helpful to sort of take a complete holistic view backup for the Kubernetes cluster so we can restore it. SOPs is just an interesting tool. Like you have a configuration management tools mostly, but like if you happen to have any plain commit files, like you should always use SOPs. So like these just generally comes to my mind. But yeah, IAC, Terraform, deployments around GitOps, around that and whatnot. But yeah, like a lot of Go, JRuby, like we used to use it. There are some cases where like we had to go to Cassandra and some stuff like that because of the scale. But usually Postgres used to work for us. But again, like I think similar stack. Curious, anyone else has specific questions? If not, I can stop the recording. Like, does anyone have a specific questions you want to ask to discuss anything?
Sure. So last night I had a problem with Terraform in general. I'm just curious, like, how do you guys deal with the chicken versus egg problem in Terraform? So Terraform, let's say you have two states. State one depends on state two. So hey, you use something called data. That's a Terraform keyword. Data is only one way. Data is only read only. So how do you actually update the cluster, the Terraform state Terraform state 1 from Terraform state 2. The closest thing I found was something called the provisioner local exec. When I saw it, I said, what a horrible solution. And all Stack Overflow said, yeah, it can't be done. But I would have thought it'd be very nice for Terraform, for that the data keyword to be a two-way binding instead of a one-way binding. I'm not sure, have you guys found out that problem, or do you guys even seen that problem? But I call it the chicken and the egg problem.
So can you share more context on like what specific data you were?
Okay, I'll give you a very specific use case. So there's a module called EKS cluster. So it spins up an EKS cluster. And then there's another module called Carpenter. I'm not sure you guys heard of Carpenter before. Carpenter is the autoscaler for EKS, for Kubernetes in general. So after Carpenter runs, it needs to modify the AWS auth config. I'm not sure, this is again very specific. AWS auth config inside the first Terraform state. So I have 2 Terraform state files. If everything's in one Terraform state file, great. However, we broke things into multiple Terraform state files. So my question is, from the Carpenter module or the new project, how do you modify the existing cluster, which is from state 1, modifying specifically the AWS auth config map?
Great. Or like, have anyone used it? If not, like I can suggest something. Like I have questions also. Have anyone used Carpenter? Like I've not used it. Anyone have solutions?
Carpenter is awesome. Carpenter.sh, I can link it, but
Okay.
that's a very specific.
I don't know whether you're sharing something. So one question I have is, do you have a configuration tooling also? Because I feel like, I mean, okay, the context is Terraform can't do everything, right? Like it sort of stops at infrastructure provisioning. We also have to add some bit of like Ansible or Chef or Puppet, because the moment you say, hey, you're dealing with data, I feel like I'm not sure whether that falls under that, because like in general, when we provision components or infrastructure, it's usually Terraform plus Ansible or Chef or whatever your configuration management tool is. For instance, like we used to deploy Kafka, and then based on some specific like provisioning, we have to provision some configuration. So because of which we used to, I mean, we rely on the configuration tools, right? I'm not sure whether local exec is a way of like storing something locally and then executing something and fetching it. But I feel like maybe the configuration management tool along with your Terraform after provisioning could help. Like would that work?
Yeah, maybe.
Gotcha. Okay. Like we will have a look at the Carpenter. Maybe someone can share something async as well.
Harry, I will contact you. Yeah,
sorry.
Maybe I will contact you later. We do use Carpenter at home, and I can. We have a awesome guy in our team who is very kind of knowledgeable on those Terraform the Carpenter. Maybe I can connect you to. You guys can have more meaningful chat.
I already searched. It's actually I did my Stack Overflow question, and this was like 85 stars, and Stack Overflow says, yeah, it can't really be done. It's actually a problem in Terraform. The problem in Terraform is the data keyword. It's a one-way binding. It's read-only. You can't write back. And I'm going, shoot, but we need a write-back mechanism. And then the workaround is called provisioner local exec. And I'm going, but that's horrible workaround.
Yeah, local exec is meant for executing commands, right? Like I'm not sure whether.
That's okay. I don't expect anyone to know the answer to this problem, because if I asked it on Stack Overflow and they had like 75 stars on this, like how do you update a previous Terraform state from another state, and everyone gives the same answer, provisioner local exec, then that's the accepted answer. But like I say, there are huge problems with provisioner local exec. For those who don't know, provisioner local exec means you're running any arbitrary bash command. And I'm saying that's horrible.
Gotcha. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I'll stop recording, stop the recording.